Hello, my dear students. Today I'll take up the first lesson of your supplementary reader, Footprints Without Feet, the first chapter of your book named A Triumph of Surgery. Let us see what the story talks about. Tricky, a small dog, is pampered and overfed by his rich mistress. He falls seriously ill and his mistress consults a veterinary surgeon. Does he perform an operation? Does the dog recover? So in this story, we'll get to know about a dog whose name is Tricky, and as it says here, he's pampered and overfed by his rich mistress. So this dog falls ill and his mistress had to consult a veterinary surgeon. Who is veterinary? Veterinary is a doctor of animals. So the writer of the story is James Herriot, who is a veterinary doctor, and he has to perform an operation on the dog. But does he really perform an operation? Does the dog recover at the end? This is what we will see in this lesson. A triumph of surgery. Triumph means victory. So how the doctor was able to have a victory over this surgery. Before starting with the story, let us know a little about the author. James Alfred White. The story is written by James Alfred White, who was born on 3rd October 1916. He was also known by the pen name James Herriot. Pen name means by some other name. He was a British veterinary surgeon and writer who used his many years of experiences as a veterinary surgeon to write a series of books, each consisting of stories about animals and their owners. So James had a lot of experience in treating these animals, and this made him write many stories about animals and their owners. James Herriot is also the narrator of the story. The main character in the story is a pet dog whose name is Tricky. He is pampered, overfed and spoiled by its rich owner, Mrs. Humphrey. She is a rich lady and she is too concerned about her dog and indulges her dog Tricky with so much food and comforts that the dog becomes overweight and he is not even able to walk properly. So the story begins when Mrs. Humphrey takes her dog out for a walk, and the narrator sees the dog and he stops his car. Let us read the story. I was really worried about Tricky this time. I had pulled up my car when I saw him in the street with his mistress, and I was shocked at his appearance. He had become hugely fat, like a bloated sausage, with a leg at each corner. So when the writer, he saw this dog on the road along with his mistress, he was shocked to see that this dog has become extremely plump, very fat, and it looked like a bloated means swelled up sausage. Sausage is an item of food, and its leg had seemed to be spreading away from each other. His eyes bloodshot and rheumy. Bloodshot is reddish eyes, and here it can refer to tired eyes. There was tiredness in his eyes, and rheumy means watery. Stared straight ahead and his tongue lolled from his jaws. So he was lazily moving with tired eyes, and his tongue was hanging lazily out of his jaws. Mrs. Humphrey hastened to explain. Hastened means in a hurried manner. He was so listless, Mr. Harriet. He seemed to have no energy. I thought he must be suffering from malnutrition. So I've been giving him some little extras between meals to build him up. So she tried to explain about this condition of the dog to the doctor, that he had become very weak, and listless means lacking in energy. So the lady thought that he might be suffering from lack of nutrition diet, and that is why she was providing him little extras, means extra meals beyond, away from meal, the normal routine meal. She was giving extras also in between to boost his energy. And what were those things? There were some malt and cod liver oil and a bowl of Horlicks at night to make him sleep. Nothing much really. You think this is nothing much? Or is it very little amount that she was offering to the dog? In fact, she was feeding the dog excessively. And did you cut down on the sweet things as I told you? Here the doctor might have instructed the lady earlier to reduce on the diet of sweets to the dog, and he again asked her, was she strictly following that? Was she not giving sweets to him anymore? Oh, I did for a bit, but he seemed to be so weak I had to relent. Relent means could not follow very strictly. So out of this overflowing love for the dog, Mrs. Humphrey had to take little carelessness about this strict diet, and she used to offer him many sweet things as well. He does have cream cakes and chocolates, so I can't bear to refuse him. So the dog liked to have cream cakes and chocolates, and out of love, the lady could not refuse to give him to the dog. I looked down again at the little dog. That was the trouble. Tricky's only fault was greed. So now the doctor could guess what the reason could be for the condition of this dog, and it was his greed for food. The dog loved to have food. He had never been known to refuse food. He would tackle a meal at any hour of the day or night. Means he could have food any time of the day. And I wondered about all the things Mrs. Humphrey hadn't mentioned. So the doctor guessed that there might be a list of other things which Mrs. Humphrey had not even told him. Are you giving him plenty of exercise? He further asked, was she taking the dog for some exercise also? Well, he has his little walks with me, as you can see. But Hodgkin, the gardener, has been down with lumbago, so there has been no ring throwing lately. So the activity which was given to the dog was a sort of playful game which the gardener used to do. He used to take the dog to the garden and throw some rings, and the dog used to go run and collect the rings. But now, since the gardener is suffering from lumbago, it is a pain in the muscles and joints of the lower back, so he was not being able to come, and so the lady was taking her dog out for the walk, and where she met the narrator. You can see here, children, Tricky, the dog, how he has become excessively fat due to overfeeding. I tried to sound severe. Severe means in a harsh or strict tone. Now I really mean this. If you don't cut his food right down and give him more exercise, he is going to be really ill. You must harden your heart and keep him on a very strict diet. James could guess the condition the dog was into. He needed intense care, and so he warned the lady to follow a very strict diet plan for the dog, or else he would be very seriously ill. Mrs. Pumphrey wrung her hands. "Oh, I will, Mr. Harriet. I am sure you are right, but it is so difficult, so very difficult." Mrs. Pumphrey wrung her hands. She twisted or squeezed her hand in an anxious manner, and though she tried to convince the doctor that she would follow the instructions, she knew that it was very difficult for her to go on. She set off, head down, along the road, as if determined to put the new regime into practice immediately. Though she was very sad, with her bent down head, she moved along the road, but somewhere in her mind she was making up her mind to follow this new diet plan for the dog, and that too very soon. I watched their progress with growing concern. The doctor could see them going, but he had a sense of concern for the dog. Tricky was tottering along in his little tweed coat. The lady had worn the dog with a tweed coat, rough woolen cloth, a coat made of rough woolen cloth to protect him against cold. And how the dog was able to walk, he was moving in a very weak or unsteady manner. The doctor could see that he had a whole wardrobe of these coats for the cold weather and a raincoat for the wet days. So this was how the dog was pampered by the lady, that he had his own wardrobe of clothes where he had a variety of coats for the cold weather and also a raincoat for the wet days or monsoons. He struggled on, drooping in his harness. I thought it wouldn't be long before I heard from Mrs. Pumphrey. The dog tried hard to move ahead. Drooping means bending down, very low. To his harness is a set of straps which are tied to the belt. I thought it wouldn't be long before I heard from Mrs. Pumphrey. The doctor was very much convinced that very soon he would be getting a call from Mrs. Pumphrey. The expected call came within a few days. So it happens as the doctor had expected, a call came from Mrs. Pumphrey. Mrs. Pumphrey was distraught. Distraught here means very worried and upset. Tricky would eat nothing, refused even his favorite dishes, and besides, he had bouts of vomiting. Now the condition was terrible for the dog, as reported by Mrs. Pumphrey, that Tricky had stopped eating anything. Even his favorite dishes were disliked by him now, and he is having regular periods of vomiting now. He spent all his time lying on a rug, panting. Panting means finding hard to breathe, and rug is a floor covering where he sits the whole day. Didn't want to go for walks, didn't want to do anything. So this was something serious. I had made my plans in advance. The only way was to get Tricky out of the house for a period. Now the doctor had in his mind what to do, how to follow up the treatment. He only wanted the dog to come out of the house. I suggested that he be hospitalized for about a fortnight to be kept under observation. Now the doctor wanted the dog to be hospitalized for about 2 weeks so that he could be kept under observation and the treatment could be followed up. The poor lady almost swooned by knowing that her favorite dog would be hospitalized. The lady was almost on the verge of fainting. She was sure he would pine and die if he did not see her every day. The dog was so much used to seeing the lady, being with the lady, that pine here means a painful longing, that he would not be able to live without her even for a single day. He would miss her very badly. But I took a firm line. Tricky was very ill and this was the only way to save him. But doctor was also very determined that this was the only way that the dog could be treated, or else he would be in big trouble. I thought it best to take him out without delay, followed by Mrs. Pumphrey's wailings. I marched out to the car, carrying the little dog wrapped in a blanket. Dr. Harriet took the dog wrapped in a blanket and moved towards the car, and behind was Mrs. Pumphrey, wailing. Wailing means crying with pain. The entire staff was roused, and maids rushed in and out, bringing his day bed, his night bed, favorite cushions, toys and rubber rings, breakfast bowl, lunch bowl, supper bowl. You can see the whole staff got into action. They were all moving and bringing out things which were used by the dog, like his day bed, his night bed, his favorite cushions were there, toys, rubber rings to play with, breakfast bowl, lunch bowl, supper bowl. You can imagine how luxuriously this dog was being kept in, and he was being over pampered by the lady. Realizing that my car would never hold all the stuff, I started to drive away. All these things had already been filled in the car and there was no space left. The doctor could not wait anymore and so he drove away. As I moved off, Mrs. Pumphrey, with a despairing cry, threw an armful of the little coats through the window. As if few things were still left out, Mrs. Pumphrey, she brought an armful of little coats which were used by the dog and threw them inside the window. She was in a despairing cry. She seemed to have lost all hopes. I looked in the mirror before I turned the corner of the drive. Everybody was in tears. The doctor could see through his rearview mirror that everybody were very sad. They were crying, departing from the dog. Out of the road, I glanced down at the pathetic little animal, gasping on the way by my side. When he looked at the animal, the dog, he was in a very pathetic condition. Pathetic means very pitiable. This poor little dog was trying hard to breathe. He was taking short breaths. I patted the head and Tricky made a brave effort to wag his tail. "Poor old lad," I said, "you haven't a kick in you, but I think I know a cure for you." So the doctor, right now he could see that the dog has lost all its energy. Kick here means a sharp jerking movement, which is a playful act of the dog, but he was very much assured that very soon he would be cured, as he was a veterinary doctor and he knew how to treat the dog well. So students, through the story, we get an idea that to love someone is not bad. It is the overwhelming expression of love and pampering that is harmful.